So I'm a writer. I am a freelance writer and I'm also working on a novel. And for those of you who know me, that probably makes a lot of sense to you because my whole life I've been completely obsessed with diving into stories that grip me, that make me think, that light my imagination on fire. And while having this vast imagination can be a really wonderful thing, sometimes it does have its downsides. And one of those downsides is that it can set me up to have unrealistic expectations, especially when it comes to falling in love. Remember when I was young, I would sit in my living room playing with my Barbies and watching The Little Mermaid. And my innocent brain just took in the magic of it all. And I watched as Ariel gave up her fins, her friends, and her family, all for some handsome prince up above. And while personally I didn't understand what was so great about up above, because all I wanted to do was grow those fins that she was so desperate to be rid of, I watched the movie over and over again, and I imagined what it must feel like to fall in love with a boy so deeply that you'd be willing to leave everything behind. Fast forward to middle school, and I remember feeling so grown up as our teacher read Romeo and Juliet with us. And I loved it so much, and it was so beautiful and romantic. And during class, I would glance over at my crush to see if he was as swept away with the story as I was. And two questions floated through my mind at that point. The first one was, would he be willing to die for me, just like Romeo died for Juliet? And the second question, which is probably a little bit easier, would he be willing to get matching puka shell necklaces with me? And I daydreamed that he would stand up and declare his eternal love for me, both of us draped in puka shells. My imagination ran wild, fueled by Shakespeare's tragic but romantic love story. Years later, I sat on my friend's couch and I watched as Sandy transformed herself into a sex goddess to finally capture the heart of Danny Zuko. And suddenly, I was committed to finding myself a bad boy. I wrote in my diary about a boy in my Spanish class who I knew smoked cigarettes and drank on the weekend. And I considered adding some black clothes to my wardrobe just to try and get rid of my goody two-shoes image. Spoiler, that didn't quite work out how I had planned. Eventually, I found my way to the Twilight series. And I was so obsessed with Bella's story. I completely devoured it. I was transfixed by the lengths that she would go to be with her star-crossed vampire lover. I don't think I left my room until I was completely done with the series. And meanwhile, my parents were in the kitchen yelling at me to please come empty the dishwasher. But nothing, and I mean nothing, mattered more to me in that moment than picturing myself in Bella's shoes, so obsessed with someone that I would completely alter my entire being for them. Around that time, the movie The Notebook was also really popular. And one night, I sat in the movie theater with my friends, stuffing my mouth with popcorn, tears streaming down my face as I rooted for Allie and Noah to be together. It didn't matter to me that they didn't agree on one single thing. All I knew in that moment was that Noah had run out in the rain to kiss Allie, which obviously meant that they were meant to be together. And that's all I wanted. I wanted that level of passion. And so I watched as these scenes played out in front of me in movies and in books. And I came to the conclusion that falling in love was only possible with constant uphill battles, heartache, and a complete willingness to change for the other person. So these unrealistic expectations followed me to college, where I met a tall guy with dirty blonde hair and a nice smile. And our connection was immediate, but it was the kind of connection that was held together by a thread of jealousy. And that thread was pulled so tight that it threatened to break at any moment, taking our relationship down with it. Adrenaline constantly coursed through my body like I was on an endless roller coaster that I couldn't get off of. And I was terrified but thrilled of what might happen next. And I thought that's what falling in love should feel like. I thought it was okay and normal that I was laying in bed every night crying, waiting for him to text me back. Because when he finally did text me back, I felt like I was on top of the world. For obvious reasons, that relationship was not sustainable, and the roller coaster finally came to an end. But a couple of years later, I found myself in a new relationship and on what felt like a similar ride. I'm not sure how many of you have been to Universal Studios in Florida. There's a ride there called Dr. Doom. And when you get on the ride, you strap yourself in and your feet are dangling over this really tall platform. And immediately you begin a slow ascent. And as you're creeping toward the top, your excitement is building. But then you look down and you realize that there's a 151-foot drop waiting for you. And that's what this new relationship felt like. I would experience the highest of highs while always anticipating the next drop. I was 22 and he was 29 when we met. And since he was almost 30, I figured that he must have his shit together, and that he's probably so wise. And now that I'm 31, I realize that that was probably an unfair expectation, but that's usually how that goes. But for the next 7 years, I tried to mold myself into the cool girl that he so clearly wanted. Someone who laughed at the things that brought other people joy, and someone who drank their whiskey neat, or honestly, someone who drank whiskey at all. On our first date, he ordered a Negroni. And so of course I had to order a Negroni as well. And even though my lips puckered through the bitterness, I acted like the kind of girl who always ordered a Negroni. Over the years, his love for me would become very sporadic. I would find myself on the edge of my seat, constantly waiting to hear the words that I needed and wanted to hear, but always feeling disappointed. I started to look forward to the nights when he would get wasted because that was the only time when he would really share how much he loved me. And for the next week, I would cling to those words until it was time for him to get wasted again. About a year after that relationship ended, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't shapeshift for anyone anymore. My idea of love and what I thought I deserved finally started to change. I started to look at the relationships that surrounded me in real life, rather than focusing so much on how fictional relationships made me feel, which I know probably sounds a little bit silly. But as though I manifested him just by making that promise to myself, I met Will. Will took the endless black void and filled it with so much color. And instead of letting me fall alone into the darkness, he took my hands and guided me towards the light. He was the safety net I didn't know that I needed. Every morning when Will wakes up, he gives me a kiss and says, "Good morning, beautiful." And he does that because he wants to. And in that simplicity, somehow, is everything that I've ever hoped and dreamed of. We laugh and we play and we lovingly make fun of each other and we talk about our past and our future. And he never judges me one bit. In fact, he embraces and accepts all of the twists and turns that led us to one another. He actually said that to me the other night, and I couldn't quite believe it. Whenever he says something like that, I try to freeze time so that I can memorize how his words make me feel, how the warmth flows through my body, and how his love wraps around me like a safe cocoon. I like to picture what our lives will look like in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. And I never used to allow myself to do that because I didn't want to be disappointed when the relationship ended. But now we look towards the future, eyes wide open, ready to take it on together. And so at the end of the day, the love that I thought I wanted looks so very different. And I learned that love doesn't have to be hard and complicated to feel exciting and passionate and worth it. And so what does love look like for me now? Well, for us, it looks like standing side by side, ready to take on the world together and getting to write our very own love story. And so far, our love story is better than any movie I've ever seen or book I've ever read.